Okie dokie. Uh, apologies for the lack of content the last couple of days. There's been a lot going on, but some interesting results in the FA Cup. Start with that. Couple of Premier League sides falling afoul of Championship sides, which I think are the big shocks. And of course, Grimsby doing what they did to get to the quarterfinals. No one would have had money on Grimsby being the lowest ranked side left in the FA Cup. So there's that. NRL season has started. We've got the NHL trade deadline fast approaching, and there's some big movement in the NHL, which we can discuss. And some of it, I think, eventually they're going to have to change rules on cap circumvention via the trades where teams retain salary because it's getting a bit ridiculous there. But that's interesting. So if you're an NHL fan, of course, trade deadline day approaching. Um, I do think at some point the NHL is going to change how certain trade rules work because we've seen some 3 or 4 way trades where certain teams are gaining a percentage of salary retained, even though they never had the player on their books, in order for the trade to go through. And they also get a sweetener like a prospect or a couple of picks. So that's interesting if you're an NHL fan. The same happens in the NBA and the NFL and Major League Baseball. It happens in every major league in the US and Canada. So it'll be interesting to see if the NHL amends the trading rules because of how certain teams are in basically cap hell. And another team has to come in as a third party or sometimes a fourth party because we've seen some multi-team trades in recent years where a percentage of an individual player's salary is placed as part of the trade, where a team comes in, the player is technically their player for like a few minutes, and they retain a percentage of salary. So we'll see what happens there. So if you're an NHL fan, that's gonna be fun. I do know the Melbourne Storm beat Parramatta. I haven't seen the game yet because I was at work. So please, I want to watch the game in full. I know that there's several players received injuries in that game, and Cameron Monster's got either a compound fracture dislocation to one of his fingers on his hand, which may or may not require surgery. So that's a blow that I think the Melbourne Storm don't need if they're chasing finals football and to send Craig Bellamy the bellyache as head coach off on a high note. So that's a concern that there could be surgery required to his finger, which is a problem. Another big talking point that's come up in the NRL, at least, is the Sydney Roosters have applied for salary cap relief in regards to the Angus Crichton situation. Now, Angus Crichton obviously is battling some mental health demons right now, and we do wish him all the best because mental health is a bitch. I should know. I suffer with my own depression and stuff, but it is an interesting one in regards to how they go around that. So we shall see if they are given exemption to have his salary taken off the cap for next year. Um, Obviously, this is an unprecedented situation, but with the way that we now know more about mental health and head injuries and a whole variety of other things that we didn't know, let's say 5, 10 years ago, it's an ongoing thing. But it could set a precedent either way. So if the NRL say no, you can't have the salary cap exemption for him because he may never play again. That's the thing; he may not return to play. That's the interesting thing. Um, he may he may decide to retire. Now that throws up a whole other conundrum, which I think needs to be discussed. I think there's probably other players who possibly have these struggles that are battling on, maybe with or without support we just don't know about. But I think the NRL need to be very, very careful with how they handle this. It's the one. I think the big talking point is it's Sydney. Any other team, I don't think it would be as big an issue. Because the way South Sydney operate in the fact that they encourage players to sign for less money, basically, because they know the team is successful on and off the field. Players will take below average for their position or what other teams are offering. They play for less. They get the hometown discount kind of thing. If it was let's say a team that Canberra, for example, or the North Queensland Cowboys, let's use those teams as examples. I don't think the mainstream press would be kicking up such a fuss. Next Saturday is the quarterfinals of the FA Trophy. Gateshead, Varsity, Maidstone United, Barnet, York City, Altrincham, and Aldershot Town. Okay, there's a couple of clubs that you've mentioned there that I've actually got to do some club histories on, which would be quite interesting. York City, Barnet, and Altrincham were 3 of the clubs that I've listed on my to-do list. Uh, I work with a colleague who's he's a Bury fan by birth, who's from Greater Manchester. He's very interested in Altringham's history, so I've said I'll have a look at it for him. Barnet's another one, because I think they're one of the forgotten teams of Greater London, and York City, simply because I just like, I don't know what it is about the north of England, and Lancashire and Yorkshire, but I just love the rivalry between, either side of the Pennines in whatever sport we're looking at. And York is a very historic city in itself, and York City, obviously not in the Football League for a little while, but we saw their new stadium being used in the Rugby League World Cup, the LNER Community Stadium. It's a um, uh, fantastic little facility, very modern. So I'll definitely have to do a York City history video. They've had some interesting cup runs over their time, but a lot of the clubs there have been Football League clubs and have had various struggles along the way. Altrincham were denied entrance to the Football League multiple times when you had to apply, and they kept getting rejected. So that'll be um, interesting. Yeah, last night I've been having a few uh, health struggles. I think you know what I'm talking about. I was going to watch cherry pick a game. I was going to watch the Burnley Fleetwood game because it's a Lancashire derby, and Burnley did have to huff and puff for that one. The Grimsby one, I think, obviously that's record breaking for them. It's a history maker because so few clubs from their level have got to this stage in the competition. Since the fourth division was brought into being after a football league reorganisation in the 50s, um, and some big Premier League clubs or clubs in the Premier League, because there are some clubs in the Championship, um, like Sheffield United and Blackburn, who have been successful in the past at the higher level, have knocked out Premier League opposition in these midweek. I'm not a fan of these midweek FA Cup games. It really throws me out because now I'm completely thrown out for the rest of my week now. Although I've only got one working. Um, uh, you know. Um, so the FA Cup. I've been following it round for round. I think the only round I haven't watched any games was the second round, because I didn't know the second round was on, because the Rugby League World Cup was on at the time, and I was like, "What?" And the football and the rugby and all the Football World Cup was on at the time, and I was a bit surprised. I completely missed the second round. I'm not a fan of these midweek games. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I think Grimsby. I think it shows the importance of the competition, because for some of these lower league clubs like the Fleetwood and we saw Accrington Stanley get to the last round. This is extra income for them. And I remember when Bury went out of business in 2019, the Accrington chairman said that's just cost us £250,000 home and away for the two games this season that we would have budgeted for. So the lower league clubs, they're every match now is a massive payday for them. So we shall see. But no, Spurs losing to Sheffield United, for example. I mean, Spurs most likely another trophy this season. And the circulation about the rumours about Conte and what's happening with him. So we'll see. I think there's some managers who could be out of a job even before the end of the season, who are in the top half, or clubs that I think are safe from relegation. Yes, there are some very interesting countries that do play international ice hockey. I used to work with someone whose dad used to play for the Iraqi national side before Saddam Hussein was dictator. Yes, the Iraqis have had an international ice hockey team. I know the Jordanians have an international ice hockey team. It's true. Australia and New Zealand have international teams. There's some countries in South America. I think where the way international ice hockey is structured, with a world championship every year, they don't have a World Cup. So it's an interesting one with how the IIHF structure the international game. But you've got to remember, most of the professional leagues are in the Northern Hemisphere. Most professional leagues are in North America and Europe. Um, and the majority of professional players obviously come from there. So with leagues like the NHL saying that they're going to take games to Australia, that's a big thing. That's a massive thing, massive, and that cannot be understated with what they are planning to do. Now, whether it works in Australia, as I said in that video that I did the other day, is a complete enigma. We don't know. We don't know if there is enough fans, let's say in Melbourne or Sydney, to fill out a massive stadium like Marvel. We don't know if there's enough fans who may not be able to get to a game who will watch on TV. What I do know is this: there is a fan base out there. Yes, there are players out there. Two Australians, including one current active Australian, have played in the NHL. So this is not like an alien concept to them, but it's a very niche market in Australia. Now, the NHL obviously wants to grow its global appeal and fan base. So we'll see what happens with that. Wolves fan. Oh, we've got a Wolves fan. Oh God, we got a Braven. We've got a Wanderer. We've got a Wolf. Um, I've got family from the West Midlands, so you'd be fine. I've got some family links to the West Midlands, so you were right there, mate. Wolves fan here. Got home 1 a.m. last after watching us at Anfield. Yeah, I've been to Anfield as well. My first ever game that I ever went to. Kept it tight first off. Got next to nothing. Felt we're going on a bit of a run, but the Bournemouth. Um, it is very tight at the bottom, isn't it? It's tight. And there's been a lot of managerial chopping and changing with a lot of the clubs in the bottom half of the table. And so, yeah, I think, uh, yeah, Spurs. I think Spurs are vulnerable. I think that FA Cup defeat has highlighted some of the issues that Spurs have. Yeah, they've leapfrogged Newcastle, and Newcastle seem to have run out of a bit of steam. But it's if you think the Premier League is chaotic, for like the bottom half of the table, look at the Championship for promotion. And as a Blackburn fan, I can tell you we've gone from 8th to 4th in the space of 2 weeks, and we went from 3rd to 8th in the space of a month. So a few wins and a few defeats really flip everything on its head. I think Southampton are certain to get relegated. Everyone else, I have no idea. Is the basic answer. But you notice those clubs that are struggling at the moment, apart from West Ham, have all changed the manager this season. And it's true. All the clubs that are having off seasons or are in the wrong end of the table, apart from Leicester and West Ham, have all changed manager this season, or changed manager to start the season. So it's a very interesting one. I always say this: clubs that regularly chop and change manager are very rarely successful. The exceptions are Real Madrid and Chelsea. Everyone else who chops and changes, there's a lack of consistency, a lack of progression, and a lack of direction. Watford, there you go. They've gone through how many managers now? Under the current ownership, it's ridiculous. So there's a reason why certain teams like Cardiff had 3 or 4 managerial appointments in the season, and they're like facing down the barrel of relegation in their particular league. So clubs that I always say, there's clubs that always chop and change manager generally struggle. They generally have got reactionary boards or reactionary directors of football, reactionary owners who demand that instant success, which doesn't happen. Does not happen. Newcastle are ironically had a decent squad, just really poor ownership. Change the ownership, bring a new manager in, sign a handful of players. They've gone from bottom 5 to top 5. So yes, sometimes all it takes is a change of ownership or a change of manager, change of director of football or head scout, whatever it may be. Small changes, massive, massive. Wheels start turning. Wolves, I'm a bit concerned about Wolves. I think I don't know where to go with Wolves. Wolves have got a great history. I know that much. Massive, fantastic history. I mean, one of my distant relations used to play for Wolves back in I think the 50s, I believe. Horatio Carter was his name. Check him up. It's true. Uh, and I've got links to the West Midlands with my family on both sides. So the West Midlands I find a very interesting place. Very interesting place. And Wolves, one of the most historical clubs in this country, one of the oldest clubs in this country, founders of the Football League. Historically very successful. The 50s was Wolves' decade. I can't see, unfortunately, I think with the ownership model at Wolves and with a lot of clubs now, it's this instant success that's demanded. And the constant chopping and changing of manager, I don't think helps anyone. And obviously, we've been discussing the fan led review for the best part of a year and a half now, pretty much, on this channel. And what keeps coming back is stability of ownership, clubs need stability, basically. That keeps coming up. So I have some concerns about Wolves, but I think there are teams worse than Wolves in the league. I honestly believe that. I do. Um, yes, the FA Cup run of Grimsby. Yeah, it's one of the bigger talking points on the sports pages online, on social media. Like Christian Eriksen winning the League Cup. I know it's the League Cup. I know he won the Scudetto at Inter, but he's left Tottenham and had success at other clubs. It's the Spurs situation losing to Sheffield United. Spurs, where players leave, have success somewhere else, then go on to have further success at another club. Tells you all you need to know about the structures at Spurs, where they're massively underachieving. Um, FA Vars, yes. I mean, Ascot United, one of my local clubs. There you go. Newport Pagnell. I mean, now we're getting to the Midlands there. Peacehaven. Peacehaven, I believe, is the south coast. There are some locations on the map there. I haven't watched the Eel Storm match yet. I'll be watching it later on this evening as I'm winding down for an early night. I know the final. I do know the final score, and I know there's been a few injuries in the game. Tight match, and it was a toe-to-toe encounter. Both sides have good first round, opening round records, and obviously Melbourne under Craig Bellamy, I don't think I've ever, apart from I think the first couple of seasons, haven't lost the opening match in like 15, 16 years. And the last couple of years, that has been tested, and I think both Parramatta and Melbourne have got weaker sides this year. I think for them to, especially Parramatta, to get back to a grand final, I think they could do it if they go on a run because they're that type of team. But Melbourne, I mean, they win the first game, but is their window really closing now with Craig Bellamy and the spine of players they've got? I know Harry Grant, I think, has the potential to be a fantastic player. Fantastic. We're talking ridiculously fantastic. He's good, but he has the potential to be world class kind of level. I don't think he's at a Roby or a Cameron Smith kind of longevity yet. We'll have to see with him. I think there are a few better nines in the game. There are a few ahead of him, but he has the potential to be in that like top five consistently for a decade. So we'll see what happens there. Imagine living in Australia and trying to be an ice hockey fan. They're out there. They're out there. I think what is interesting is there is a cultural link between North America and Australia, and it goes back to World War II with the US personnel in large numbers being based in places like Darwin, in Sydney, and Melbourne for lengthy spells during World War II, which is why baseball's played over there and basketball's played over there. I wouldn't say it's a nightmare. There are ways to access the product. Um, and not every Australian's an Aussie Rules fan or rugby league fan. It's a very diverse sporting landscape in Australia, and the thing is, there's a lot of US military personnel who are based over there for 6 months to 2 years at a time, depending on their role. And there's a lot of international companies that are based in like Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne. There's a lot of international organisations based in Canberra, the capital. So Perth's a fast-growing city. So Darwin's obviously got a lot of um, military personnel, a lot of military bases in the Northern Territory. So I don't think it's unheard of that the US and Canadians, there's a fair few Canadian mining companies that have links with Australia as well, which are global companies. It wouldn't. It's not without the realms of possibility that they've gone over there for work, or some of them have actually retired over there because it's actually cheaper to live in Australia than the US and Canada for cost of living. They've mingled with the locals, or they might have gone over there for work, had kids, that kind of thing. Settled. There's a fair expat community of North Americans in Australia, so I don't think it's completely alien. And I don't know 100% how all the media deals work and regional blackouts and how accessibility of the product. But if the NHL is serious about taking matches there, they've got to open up the they've got to open up the TV and broadcasting and the online deal to the Australian market, like the NRL and AFL done to the global market with their websites. I think the NHL, if it is deadly serious about growing its product, they need to look at their overseas TV deal because, in my opinion, I don't think it's great. the overseas deal that fans outside of the US and Canada get with the NHL. And I would say the same is probably the same for Major League Baseball. At the NBA, I think does pretty well at promoting itself overseas. The NFL is obviously the league that promotes itself the best. It's not because the product's any good necessarily; it's the way they market and sell themselves. So I think it would be. I wouldn't say try to be an Aussie. Look, random Souths fan, for example. Look, rugby league is a very I wouldn't say niche sport, but is a smaller global imprint than other international sports. There's always that random Souths fan everywhere globally. It doesn't matter in the world. South Sydney fan will that random Souths fan will appear. It's like how Manchester United in the '90s branded themselves in the beginnings of the Premier League. Same with Real Madrid and Barcelona. You look at some of the poorest countries in Africa. There's always a Man United, Barcelona, and a Real Madrid shirt somewhere in a township or a slum into Africa or Nigeria or whatever country it is, because they've got their global marketing strategy right. Regardless if the product on the field is any good, they seem to sell themselves globally really, really well. What do I think of Craig Bellamy as a coach? God, he was an irritant as a player. As a Blackburn fan, I can say I wasn't a fan of him playing for us because he would give away silly free kicks, he would give away silly penalties, and a lot of ex-referees and coaches have said he was a nightmare to coach and he was a nightmare to referee because he was an irritant. The thing is, you want that kind of irritant upsetting the balance of the opposition, and if you're an opposition team and you've got Craig Bellamy, you know it's going to be, oh, we're in for a game here. He's going to be really annoying. Get the centre back off his comfort zone. He'll aggravate the goalkeeper or the centre midfielder or maybe the young player one of the younger players, get him flustered in like early on in his career, so he might make a mistake. There is no doubt on his work rate, his energy, and his fitness. But Craig Bellamy as a coach, I don't know. I'm not. I'm not. I don't. I've heard good and bad about Craig Bellamy, so I want to. I haven't looked at his body of work to say if he's good or bad. But there's been a lot of negative headlines about him, and there's been some positive headlines about him. But there always seems to be a bit of controversy around Craig Bellamy. Now, what is interesting, and I will say this, and I try and keep as unbiased as possible these days. I mean, look, my most popular video on this channel is the video I hate the most, discussing Dan Rowan and the Leicester City helicopter crash, right? And in that video, I'm too reactionary. But videos like that or content like that creates interest because it's reactionary, whether it's positive or negative reaction to it, and it's a very mixed reaction to that video. That is my least favorite video ever. I hate that video. It's my most popular content, and I hate it. I mean, I could look at the career of Craig Bellamy, and I could look at his coaching career. Oh God, bellyache. Ah, right. I thought you were a football player. Oh, right. Okay. Look again. Actually, with Craig Bellamy, the Melbourne Storm head coach. Now that we've worked out that I'm completely mental, and I didn't get the hint there. Look, his record speaks for itself. A 70% win percentage. He's, I think, under him, Melbourne haven't lost an opening round fixture. I think under him at all. Um, no, he's been there for 21 years. Okay, they lost a couple, but they've won 15 in a row or something. They've got an insane record to open NRL season. Oh, I've got to get myself more comfortable. I don't know what it is, but my back has just been playing up for about 3 months now. I think it's the weather. Craig, bellyache. Uh, again, people will say, and they'll bring up the salary cap scandal, and they'll bring up some of the style of play that Melbourne play in regards to the wrestle and some of the jiu-jitsu wrestling tactics. Um, but there's no doubting on his win percentage is ridiculous, 70%. Yes, those titles were stripped, those minor premierships were stripped. We can agree or disagree what the players feel about that. But it's like Wayne Bennett though. Wayne Bennett is not universally liked in the game either. It's an interesting one. I honestly I don't know my views on it. I don't. Look, I think the way I was watching NRL 360 earlier in the week, and it looked pretty clear that actually this is his final year. I think he'll get like an ambassadorial or director of football role, or what something. But he bear in mind he's 70 years old. He's not young. He's retirement age. So I think he's done enough in the game. It's like Wayne Bennett keeps going. Wayne Bennett and Craig Bellamy are at retirement age or past retirement age. Um, I don't think he's quitting. I think that they always knew at Melbourne anything from 2020 till now would be his final year. The fact he decided to keep going 2021 and 2022, fair play to him. He was doing like that Arsene Wenger will play it by feel. But I think you can see it in the way he's been giving interviews and answering journalist questions at press conferences. He seems a little bit less intense, and I think he's basically decided enough's enough now. This will be my last year coaching, at least in a head coach capacity. I don't think he'll come out of retirement. No, not with the way he basically can't give it his same intensity to the role. Um, that I think makes him successful. And there comes a point where I can't give the same intensity or the same work ethic, not in a negative way, but you just can't physically and mentally do it. It's draining. And I think that in itself, you could see that, yeah, his race is run in a good way. And I think he wants to finish on his terms because it's not as if Melbourne Storm are going to sack him. And I wouldn't say he's quitting, he's retiring. Difference. I think Melbourne was surprised that he's gone past 2020. I thought they were, ever since the end of 2019, they're like 2020 was his last year, right? And I think, yeah, at this point, this is the end. I don't think he comes out of retirement. I think that he's got a cushy another 4 years contracted as employed by the Storm. I think he goes to a consultancy role or a director of playing operations. Sort of like a Tim Sheens in a way, except Tim Sheens has obviously decided to come back into coaching, but or a Gus Gould who will end up in that kind of role where they goes right, okay, let's set up youth pathways, let's and less hands-on coaching. Uh, my thoughts on Welsh Craig Bellamy, the football player. Irritant. I mean, there's too much controversy with him, but Craig Bellamy's had some issues as a youth coach as well at Cardiff. There's been some ups and downs with Craig Bellamy. He's a very divisive individual. As a player and as a coach, he's not particularly the most likable individual from a lot of the headlines. But then you've got to read past those headlines and actually listen. If the ex teammates and ex coaches, they were like he was a nightmare to play against. Um, but his fitness, work rate, and energy is second to none. Ultimate irritant, though. Panthers should be too strong for the Broncos. Yeah, I think some of the roster management of the Broncos leaves me a little bit concerned. If I'm being honest, I think losing Herbie Farnsworth for one, and the outside backs, and is it Flegler, the forwards to the Dolphins, bit of a head scratcher. Bit of a head scratcher. Now, obviously, those players wanted to stay in South Queensland because of where they've settled and where they now live and all that family and stuff. And in Herbie Farnsworth's case, he's left the UK and he's come all the way over here, over to the Australia. Sorry, so he's left here and gone over there at a very young age, and so he's obviously still settled in the Brisbane area. But it's like they're trying to get David Fafita back from the Gold Coast Titans. It's like, but you let him go there. So I have some thoughts about the looking at how they've managed their roster, how they've managed their squad and player retention and contracts. And I'm left think they've mismanaged a couple of players. I mean, and they've gone through coaching changes. They're on their way. This is like, yeah, Kevin Walters, I think, has stabilised a very unstable situation. But you look at it, and the Wayne Bennett era ended under a cloud. Anthony Seibold left South Sydney in my Seabold's position was a mess, which then meant Seabold's coming into a situation where the roster management hasn't been great. Where I think Wayne Bennett had overachieved with the team in his second stint at the club. Even including that 2015 grand final, I think the team did overachieve because there were some warning signs that things weren't right. They've mismanaged their youth system because for a long, long time they had the pick of the litter in South Queensland. In fact, in all of Queensland. And it's only been in recent times that Gold Coast and North Queensland have sorted out their own youth recruitment and youth development to a point where they're actually better than the Broncos now. And because they've been the only Brisbane team in first grade, you know, they have unlimited riches, basically, in regards to youth recruitment, that pulling power, where players will go there. But they overachieved under Wayne Bennett. First season under Anthony Seibold, the warning signs were there. Things weren't 100%. And then under Kevin Walters, last season, the way they fell off the cliff has to be worrying. And then you've got players coming out and past and present, you know, not helping matters by, on the public record, questioning his coaching ability and the fact they hired him in the first place. Now, I'm not. It's a difficult one. Kevin Walters, the players, like the Walters brothers, fantastic players. Kevin Walters and his brothers, as part of his coaching staff, they were fantastic players at Canberra and at Brisbane and wherever else they played. But great players don't always make great coaches. You look at the good coaches in the game or in any sport, they were generally your squad players, your engine room players, not the superstars. What I call the engine room, or the backup half, or the backup dummy half, or an unsung hero, basically the grunt. Whereas the superstar players don't make good coaches. That's very noticeable, in my opinion. It's a trend in all sports. Wayne Gretzky, greatest ice hockey player of all time, terrible head coach. Coyotes fans will tell you that. Great player, hopeless head coach. Shocking record as a head coach. Greatest player ice hockey's ever seen. Whereas some superstar players do transition to coaching really, really well. Most don't. Because of that ego, because of the fact that they have to be the centre of attention, because they used to be centre of attention on the field, off the field, they've still got to grab all the headlines. It creates an imbalance. The Panthers, look, they've gone through some roster changes as well. I wouldn't say they were like earth-shattering. They looked clunky in the World Club Challenge. They didn't look as effective. They misplayed the conditions in the World Club Challenge. I think that is very important. But they did, some of their combinations just didn't look right. Haven't bet it in yet. I think they are favourites for that game. But when I do watch the Melbourne Panthers Parramatta game, I think it's going to be a closer game than if this match took place last year. I think there is the potential for them to lose the game. They don't lose many. And because they are the top dogs, I think some weaknesses were already coming into the how they play. Some teams have figured out ways of nullifying their threats. And St Helens obviously clearly watched the tape. They clearly looked at the matches that Penrith have lost in the last 3 years. And they used that knowledge to inflict a humbling defeat on them. They worked out, okay, if you can get away with quick line speed, which basically means you've got to be offside by a couple of paces, play the referee. If the referee is strict on the 10 yards, 10 metres, okay. Clearly in World Club Challenge night, the referee was, okay, that 10 metres is 10 metres, 8.5, 9. They played the ref really well. And so their line speed and defensive organisation, the Panthers were not expecting. The Panthers were expecting a good attacking team, weaker defensive team, and that wasn't the case. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if a well-prepared NRL side will look at the footage of the World Club Challenge. And yes, you could argue some Dylan Edwards, for example, at fullback wasn't there. Crichton, he's more of a centre. You know, fullback he can play there, but he didn't have the best game at fullback. So yeah, you can say some players, Fisher Harris and Dylan Edwards weren't there. Okay, you lose a little bit from them, but the system is still the same regardless of the personnel. And so, if the Broncos are well prepared by Kevin, and if the following opponents are well prepared, there's a blueprint of how to do it. The conditions, I think, also help St Helens, but there's a blueprint of how to unsettle them and get yourself into the arm wrestle. And you've got to target that forward pack early with fast line speed and target the 9 because Coruscant's gone now. So that junction between 9 and Cleary and Luai, depending on whoever they put in at dummy half, that is target the forward pack, target the 9. Because if they're giving disrupted or slower ball, Kai Cleary can get you out of trouble with slow ball. Luai can't. Luai is too off the cuff and too unstructured. And if the ball is slower and you're in his face, you're not giving him space, it will force him to overplay, which he did against St Helens and was he's less effective. If you are passive defensively and passive with your line speed and you don't target the 9, Coruscant's obviously gone, that's clearly the weakness, they will steamroll you. They'll get confidence and they'll have go forward. So the key component of beating Penrith is basically slow the ball down, line speed, and target the 9. So you target the 9 when he's defending, run his channel, keep running his channel, keep running his channel. And then quick line speed, okay, if it comes to final play, force them to give it to Luai rather than Cleary. So extra pressure on the halfback, which means then Cleary, when he does get the ball, he's got to get it right every time. And that is very, very difficult. But there's a way of unsettling them. It's really simple, really. It's playing the ref. And once the ref has said, that's your 10 metres. In reality, it's 8.5, 9. You've got that extra pace to shorter to attack the play the ball and attack the 9-7-6 axis. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what the weather conditions are like. We'll see who receives the first kickoff. Will say a lot. If it's Penrith receiving first kickoff, you want to have that line speed in your face. If it's the other way around, don't make a mistake in the first couple of sets. It's pure simplicity. Keep things simple. Get hands on the ball. Complete your set. Do the basics. Play yourself into the game. Defeat. And I honestly believe there are ways of easily beating this Penrith side. Very few teams have figured out. But there's only a handful of teams I think that can do it on a regular basis. So there is that to consider. Is yes, they are the best team in the competition. They're still favourites, but there's a reason why 3 in a row hasn't been done since the 80s. And 4 grand finals in a row hasn't been done since, I think, the 80s as well. If not St George Dragons from their dominant period, they I think won 11 in a row. So they're trying to break records in the NRL era. I mean, to do it hasn't been done in the modern era. Hasn't been done since it was New South Wales Rugby League. So it will take some doing. And we've seen some very dominant teams in the past. And if they do make a fourth grand final in a row, then we have to seriously start asking questions about how do you topple this team, because they've been top two for 3 years in a row. They minor premiers twice, 3 times grand finalists. Because when they do lose a player, they have a production line of talent coming um, through the grade levels, and it's not just a handful; it's a whole team at a time. So the winning mentality starts from the age of like 15, 16, maybe even younger, all the way up to first grade. So they are an organisation that is structured to win. Now, obviously, they can't win forever. No one can. They will have a down season or seasons. But look, we were having the same discussion about the Roosters. Could they do three in a row? Haven't been to a grand final since. So if the Roosters are something to go by, they eventually ran out of steam. Melbourne haven't appeared in the last two grand finals since they won in 2020. Um, it looks like they ran out of steam a little bit and looking more vulnerable. And they've just lost a lot of experienced players, a lot of leaders. Um, and I think they I think shouldn't have got rid of Dale Finucane and Nico Hines, for example, to Cronulla last year. They shouldn't have let both Bromwich brothers go. Maybe one, but not both. And Felice Kafusi. I think they definitely would want that decision again. Um, maybe lose two of them, not all three. Maybe lose just Nico Hines or Dale Finucane, not both, because they had more impactful seasons for their new team. So I think that they have made a few errors of judgment in regards to some of the roster management. I think at Melbourne, I think they would want a handful of those decisions back. Christian Welsh, while he is the leader of the team, really in reality, he is. He hasn't really been fully fit for a while. And there's only so much leadership you can give in the dressing room and on the sidelines when you're not actively playing because you're recuperating from injury. You know, Ryan Pappenhausen, bad injury. Um, yeah, Nick Meaney's been a good pickup. He's a different type of player because he's more of he can play multiple backline positions effectively. Um, I think letting go of Josh Adokar, I think that was another error. Um, but they again keep finding talent and they again keep defying the odds. So winning teams will attract players with the right mentality. They'll attract the right figures for the team. And because the Roosters and the Melbourne Storm, even Canberra, I mean, Ricky Stewart's been there, it seems like forever. He hasn't, but it seems like he has. And as a Raiders fan, we've had some good runs and come up just short. We're the underdogs, I suppose, when it comes to the final eight, top eight. But there's a reason why certain coaches have longevity at clubs and stick around, and why players are willing to play at certain clubs. It's because of the coach, not necessarily the location, because of the coach. And those three coaches I mentioned have won grand finals. They've got premierships. And in Ricky Stewart's case, he's got premierships both as a coach and as a player, which is another rare thing. And he's one of the few superstar players who's become a superstar coach, a very successful one. So I think this NRL season is going to be very, very interesting. I think it's going to be harder to predict, should I say, than some other seasons. Who makes the eight? Who's going to be the wooden spoon? Who's going to win the grand final? While Penrith are favourites, I can see it being a lot harder for them to achieve that three in a row than people expect. I think you look at past attempts to win three in a row in recent times have come up short, and there's a reason why it hasn't happened since the 80s. So not in the modern NRL era. It has not happened. Um, we've had teams come close, and it made the injuries have started piling up, fatigue levels have started piling up. Um, Players obviously move on and retire. It's a squad overhaul, and it's very, very hard to win back to back, let alone three in a row. Twice. It so rarely happens in sport, um, especially in sports with salary caps and the league structures that we see. Um, Teams that manage to do it more than three in a row are ridiculous, and they are few and far between. Um, you're more likely to be unsuccessful than successful. Let's say that, because there can only be one winner at the end of the day. There can only be one minor premier. There can only be two grand finalists and one premiership winner in the NRL. Same with the AFL. In the NBA and the NHL, you get the four division champions, two conference champions, and the overall winner. So very, very few teams win, but you're more likely to a long period of lack of success, the West Tigers, for example, than a successful period. The Newcastle Knights have more wooden spoons in the NRL era than you know than this current Penrith team have grand final victories. The Newcastle Knights have three wooden spoons in a row. Now, yes, Penrith have obviously won three grand finals in the NRL era and four overall, but the Newcastle Knights were dreadful. Uh, 6, 7 seasons ago, they were absolutely dreadful. Three wooden spoons in a row. The West Tigers haven't played finals football in over a decade. They have missed the eight. The only other comparable team that is equally as bad as the Buffalo Sabres in the NHL, who just failed to make playoffs. So let that sink in. And not long before Penrith started winning, they weren't great. They were middle of the pack. They had some good seasons, they had some bad seasons, but they weren't fantastic. They just have really good youth development, really good youth scouting, some bloody good coaching, and they have some good club structures off the field, which enable them to win on the field. It's simple fact. They're not the wealthiest club by any means. I think they actually operate at a loss. If they were a standalone entity, they would operate at a loss. But because of the way the NRL operates its finances with payments to clubs and revenue sharing, they survive. If this was the Football League in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, Penrith would be in administration. They would be bust. They don't make a lot. They don't. Obviously, I think the success has helped with gate receipts, helped with merchandise sales, and helped with interest and raising capital. I think is the way to look at it, and increasing their revenue. But if they have a couple of down years, they're in trouble. They. It's interesting how rugby league finances work. To say that. But the Brisbane Broncos, in rugby league terms, is a license to print money. Hello there, afternoon. I'm not going to be doing a live stream forever. I will be watching the Melbourne Storm Parramatta Eels game on NRL.com in 20 minutes, something like that. But I thought I'll just do a little live stream. And I had an early finish at work, so I'm in a bit more of a relaxed mood this afternoon. I do apologise for the somewhat lacking content of late. There's been things going on. It had to be dealt with away from the channel, so which will explain in due course. Well, on the wooden spoon of rugby, on the top. Ireland are favourites for a Grand Slam. They've still got to play 2 more matches yet, so I don't count your eggs till they've hatched. Wales, though, look, they've got the worst for and against in regards to points scored, points conceded, tries. entrance, points after entering an opponent's. Italy will destroy them without doubt. Without doubt, Wales are dreadful. They are in serious trouble. Um, and I understand the backdrop with what's happening with the dispute between the union and the player base. Um, but I just don't know. I just don't know with Wales what's going on because it seems as if we've gone back to 2019 and the same issues applied then that are applying now with the financial issues, regions, player contracts, and the uncertainty. And I think that's having an impact on the field. Has to. I don't think going back to Warren Gatland is the right answer for Wales' problems on the field. And he was instrumental in getting Wayne Pitt back in the role. Um, I don't think the situation's tiled. We'll have to see how the final couple of games play out, but I fear that Ireland are peaking before the World Cup. I think France having a little wobble, I think, would be good for them. Ironically, I think that would actually suit the French. Um, but we'll have to see how it all plays out. Honestly, I think yes, if you're Fiji or Georgia, you want it, to start now while you're in form and while your players are playing well. A lot can happen in the best part of 6, 7 months. A lot can happen. And while I think it was right that England replaced Eddie Jones, and while I think it was right that Wayne Pivac it wasn't working, I think the timing is leaving it a little bit late to. Football's different, but rugby or rugby league is completely different to football. Um, I think Steve Borthwick is the right guy for England, honestly. I can see what he's trying to implement, although some of his squad rotation for the next game, Marcus Smith not getting in there, um, George Ford being recalled, maybe he's looking at the opposition and just going, right, let's just keep it basic and we will work to that really expansive game when we go through the phases of growth. And that's fine. He's got a very short time with the players before the World Cup. But nothing wrong with Steve Borthwick rotating his fly halves and looking at the three fly halves that will be going for the World Cup, which will be Ford, um, you know, and Farrell ahead of him, and Smith. They'll be the three fly halves he will most likely be taking, barring injury or suspension. And he wants to see all three of them. That's fine. Warren Gatland, however, oh Christ, Wales are buggered. Gatland ball. I mean, I don't like his style of play anyway, but the game has evolved since he last coached. Honestly, the game has moved on in 4 years. The rule variations have come in. The pace of the game has changed. The style of the game has changed. Other nations have changed with it. And when they lost to Georgia in the autumn, Italy also lost that same Georgian side. The difference was Italy put out a B team. Wales put out the strongest available 15 on the field and the strongest available bench they had because of injury and suspension and players not being eligible because of the stupid 60 odd cap rule. So the Italian side running out into the Georgians was their young players, basically, and some of their fringe squad players. Just getting a run out, just to, in a World Cup cycle, give those guys some game time, figure out if they're up to international standard. Give them some game time, figure out some new combinations, some backup combinations. The Welsh side that went out was a full strength Welsh side, and they were embarrassed comprehensively in the autumn. So I don't know. I couldn't tell you. That sums up where I think the mindset of the Welsh players is right now. I don't think it's fully focused on the job at hand with what's happening off the field. And I know the union have sort of come to some kind of sticking plaster. It's not going to last. Um, yes, Grimsby. We've mentioned Grimsby, and again that creates more interest, not just of the domestic market, but the overseas viewership for the competition. And that's definitely something you can sell. The fact that sports fans love an underdog story. I don't think Wales get out of the World Cup, not with how they play. And I think Warren Gatland, the union, the Welsh union, it's it worked before. The game has evolved. Warren Gatland is stuck in 2019, 2018 with his style of play. What was successful then is not successful now. Georgia's in the Basketball World Cup. If I was a giant Georgia, which sport would you rather pursue? Well, rugby union's now become the national sport, so and a lot of the Georgian rugby players come off. There's a traditional form of wrestling they practice in Georgia, which is similar to ancient Pancratian Greek grapple wrestling from the ancient Olympics. There's cultural links, historical links with that, and they love the physical side of the game. Um, and the Georgians have bought into the physicality of rugby union. I think they would love rugby league if that was the code that got there first. Just have rugby union got established first. Um, what do I think of sports personalities having YouTube channels? Got nothing against it. It depends on what content they're making and if it's controversial. Is my answer on that one. It all depends on what content they're producing. If it's controversial and brings their sport into disrepute, or it's in breach of their sport and code of conduct or guidelines, then they're idiots. If it's like, you know, some of them during the lockdowns when they couldn't obviously play or train, got on the Instagram, got on the YouTube, and some of their content's actually quite funny. Um, some of them actually, so some rugby league players have got podcasts because they know that at some point their playing careers are going to end and they need another form of income. Um, and so I'm not against it necessarily. Some of them are ex-athletes, so they obviously get their podcast or you know get like bloke in a bar. Like Dean and Kemp, he didn't have the best rugby league career. He's obviously better than me, but um, he's got bloke in a bar. He's set up his own um, clothing brand and his own beer brand. He's doing quite well, and his company's growing, and his podcast is making him a lot of, and he's doing quite well. Um, there's a few others. I'm not against it. I think it does depend on the content. Um, some of them I can't stand personally, um, but I do decry the fact that we do have this lack of personality in sport. It seems, um, but I think it depends on what they're doing. Um, as long as it's well, that's quite reasonable. As long as it's not, I don't know. I've got mixed views on it. I think it depends on what kind of content they're creating and what kind of audience they're catering for. And like Chad Townsend, I like his little interview style podcast thing, but he normally interviews bloody teammates. So it's sort of like, well, you've already got a good working relationship with the person you're interviewing. Whereas Dean and Kemp, I can't stand his effing and blood. I think he does swear too much, but he's normally aiming for the Australian audience, and their views on foul language are a little bit different to what some of us deem is okay. But let's just say my mum wouldn't listen to it. Let's just say that she'd be like, "Oh," and I can sort of get the viewpoint of talking the athlete's language, I suppose. And he's obviously appealing to his viewership and listenership in regards to his content. But I don't think he's appealing to a wider audience. I think, but I like some of the interviews he does with ex players and other sports stars as well. So uh, we'll see. My thoughts on Spurs' defeat to Sheffield United. Sheffield United are a very good side. I think they should be a Premier League side. They're playing like they're a Premier League side at the moment. As a Blackburn fan, I can attest to that. They've been very good all season. Not quite as Burnley, but they've been very good all season. But three out the top four in the Championship all won um, in the FA Cup over the last 2 days. Two of them won against Premier League opposition, and Burnley had to beat Fleetwood. I had to get that little dig in there. But three out of the top four won in the Championship in the FA Cup to get to the quarterfinals. To get that little dig in there. But three out of the top four won the Championship in the FA Cup to get to the quarterfinals. I think that sort of tells you the teams that are going to get promotion are. Um, and one of them has to do it via the playoffs, which most likely be Blackburn. And I'm a Blackburn fan, so I wouldn't mind a trip to Wembley in May. To say, so that sort of tells you where those teams are at. Um, Tottenham, on the other hand, another trophy this season. That has, I mean, Spurs fans at some point they've got to say enough's enough, where they keep coming up short every year. And I think Tottenham's best chance of winning silverware or start winning silverware, to start that winning trend, they've had their window in place. I think that was between 2015 and 2019. That was their championship window where they could win maybe one, two, or three trophies. Didn't matter if it's a league title, one of the cups they were playing for, like could be League Cup, FA Cup, Champions League, Europa League, whatever competition they get to the final. That was their window, and they didn't capitalise in that time frame. They failed to capitalise when they had a squad at its peak, playing at its best. They failed. Now, how much of that is actually on Pochettino? Because they did give Pochettino a run with the team. They gave him a run with, apart from the period where the stadium was being built and they didn't sign any new players for 18 months, that was the mistake. The stadium redevelopment and the lack of signing players for a year and a half has cost this team. It has cost the team. There's nothing wrong with the old White Hart Lane. It was like, oh, Arsenal have a shiny stadium. Well, let's have a shiny toilet bowl as well. Because I'm not sold on the atmosphere at some of these stadiums. That was a vanity project in Spurs' behalf. There are some very successful teams who have far smaller stadiums that it doesn't bother them because they know, regardless of what happens on the field, they've got a good connection with the community and they're going to sell out every week because the way they engage with the community, win or lose, the club has a very good bond with the community they play in. Spurs' new stadium was a pure vanity project for their owners. There you go. Ninian Park, it was a bit tired by the end. That's the problem. I understand why they did a new stadium. I do. At the same time, I don't like some modern stadium designs either. But it's the trend we're going in now. And most stadiums now have naming rights. Thankfully, Ewood Park is still Ewood Park. Thankfully, Barnsley, Oakwell, still Oakwell. Thankfully, Turf Moor, still Burnley's own ground called Turf Moor. It's not got crappy naming rights. The Riverside is obviously it's not Ayerson Park for Middlesbrough fans, but it's not got that crappy naming rights. St James's Park, be it Exeter or Newcastle, still called that. I believe so. I think the club's got too much debt to even attempt to build a new stadium because of the Venkeys, and I don't think the fans would be sold on it. It's one of the oldest football league grounds in existence. We've been playing there since 1890. I can't see the fans being in favour of a new ground. Not with the amount of effort put into 3 out of the 4 stands. I know the Dot I know the Riverside stand, definitely needs modernising. I think that'll be the next thing on the to-do list, but I cannot see moving. Capacity, I think about 35, 36,000, something like that, maybe 38? It's in the 30s. It's not small, it's not big, it's just right. I can't see building a new stadium being the answer because it just doesn't work for me. It's the same with Palace completely, doing a Cardiff and moving out of Selhurst Park or Burnley leaving Turf Moor. It just doesn't feel right. It doesn't suit the identity of what the club's about. Um, and I don't like these soulless bowls of stadiums. It doesn't. Atmosphere goes a long way. It doesn't matter how. I mean, this is why I like Loftus Road with QPR because it's a very intimate ground and it's a very intimidating ground because you're right on top of the players. If you're the away team, it's just you don't want to be the away team at Loftus because the fans they could reach out and grab you. I'll tell you that. Um, well, look at the end of the day, obviously it's club decisions. Some stadiums, the upkeep, 'cause it's an older ground, it does get a bit expensive. It may not be conducive to redevelop the place because of developments around and planning permission. So sometimes it is we have to move on. But I it's just a difficult one. Sometimes it is actually cheaper to build a new one than fix in place. I like what Man United have done with Old Trafford historically, what Liverpool have done with Anfield historically, and what Wolves have done with Molineux, and what they've done with Vicarage Road, for example. But sometimes, such as in Chelsea's case, you can't expand anymore. You're stuck because of not ownership of the stadium, but whether ground is located and the surrounding infrastructure around it. You just cannot do it anymore, which is a problem. Whereas other clubs, the location of the ground is a bit more flexible, and so therefore you can do a redevelopment in place or refurbishment or add-ons or modernisations bit by bit without having to ground share. Just imagine if like Sheffield Wednesday or Sheffield United have to ground share with the other one. That would be disastrous. Oh, the Kip Hats, yeah, everyone up a bit of Main Road. I understand that Manchester City were like, we're getting this stadium cheap. The old Commonwealth Games, we're getting it cheap. I completely understand the economic logic of it. And Main Road was bear in mind, Main Road was in a very rough area, the Moss Side area of Manchester. It wasn't particularly pleasant area to have a major sports facility with what was happening at the time, and so Manchester City economic reasons. I think it makes logical sense. Um, the fact the stadium's called the Etihad, not called the City of Manchester Stadium or whatever Road Junction is, or the Commonwealth Stadium or whatever, and it has the naming rights. So I don't like that, but it is what it is. It's like Arsenal with the Emirates. It's not Highbury, it's the Emirates, and when that sponsorship deal expires, it'll be called the insert company name here. Um, it's like Leicester with Filbert Street. It's like the stadium like at Sunderland. I mean, it's something that we need to consider losing that traditional side of the game. I understand modernisation and growth and globalisation, but those little traditions, not all of them, but some of them are absolutely vital to the history and the marketability. Because I know a lot of Americans in North America, Canadians in the US, they hate it's now called the so and so arena. What's wrong with the LA Coliseum, or what's wrong with Maple Leaf Gardens or the Montreal Boston Gardens? It's got naming rights now. So it's like the Bell Centre, MTS Centre, General Motors Play. And you're thinking, this is crap. And I do understand this. we over here in Europe think, oh, the Americans love their capitalism. They don't. They don't like the fact that certain the majority of their sports arenas, you the naming rights and the constant barrage of commercialism. Um, it it's something that, bear in mind, the most capitalist economy in the world. The fans are ripping out their hair because they've now got sponsors on their ice hockey and NBA jerseys. They can't cope with that, but they can cope with lawyer ads, doctors ads, pharmaceutical advertisements. The crap they put in their food, they can't cope with a company name. Just here, but they can't cope with that. They can't cope with that. I'm just like, but you're the most capitalist society in the world. You think having social health care is communist, and that we're all commies because we have the NHS. They can't cope with an advert on a sports jersey. But they say we're communists because we have social care, basically. We have just brain just I'm having an aneurysm listening to this. And I'm half tempted on some of the content. Oh, Bolton, yeah. The Reebok, the Macron, the University of Bolton Stadium. There you go. There's the three names that the stadium's had. Um, that's what's going to happen with the Emirates or the Etihad when, at some point, for whatever reason, the sponsorship deal ends. It will be something else. And I'm so glad the majority of clubs like Wolves, Aston Villa, Blackburn, Burnley, a lot of the founders of the Football League, basically, ironically, who knew? I think all the founders of the Football League basically haven't given naming rights to their stadium. Even Derby with Pride Park used to be obviously the baseball. No naming rights, still with Pride Park. Aston Villa, it's Villa Park. West Brom, the Hawthorns, that they haven't given. What I find really refreshing is the majority. I think obviously Accrington Stanley is a rebirth of a rebirth of the original. Bury of obviously AFC Bury. So two of the founders of the Football League have gone bust. But in reality, the clubs are still going in the communities with the fan base with reformation. But I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe the remaining founders of the Football League, who are still going, 10 clubs in total, apart from Bolton, I actually believe the stadiums do not have naming rights. And I could be wrong with that, but I believe so. Founders of the Football League, Everton still at Goodison, Blackburn still at Ewood now, weren't at Ewood at the Foundation Turfmoor. Obviously, Bury were at Gig Lane. They are still at the new AFC Bury are at Gig Lane. Aston Villa, Villa Park, Wolves, Bologne, West Brom, Hawthorns. I believe the majority of the founders of the Football League, yeah, I do believe they still have no naming rights for stadiums. What Phoenix clubs, if they've been reformed by the fans in regards, they play, yes. If it's a continuation where they've liquidated and reformed, you just go from the current history, but you have to accept, like, because AFC Wimbledon, they are basically inherited Wimbledon Football Club's history from pre-MP on. So any kind of memorabilia or trademarks, the logo, retro kits, they've got the rights to that. So yes, a court of law says you can ask Wimbledon fans. And also they did go to court over trademarking rights, logos, historical footage, memorabilia, all sorts. And they also bought the Plough Lane site back and redeveloped the new stadium just down the road from the old stadium on a similar piece of ground through the local council. So yes, Accrington Stanley will say, yes, our forebears of this club founded the Football League alongside Bury. And Bury, AFC Bury, will say Bury FC is the founder club of the Football League, and we've inherited the FA Cup history. It's like Rangers. Yeah, okay, the club itself is not exactly the same. Does anyone like MK Dons? I'm not even sure people in Milton Keynes like MK Dons personally because they can't fill out their stadium. That's something. As I say, I'm not even sure if people in Milton Keynes like MK Dons, or not enough of them at least. But that's what happens when you move a football club to F1 and ice hockey country. Just the established sports that are already there are far more successful, employ more people locally, and have a better community link because they've been there for donkey's years. The most of the team's headquarters in F1 are in Milton Keynes. The ice hockey club, the teams that go with that, the Elite League and the National League and such, have been going in that location longer than MK Dons. And the Milton Keynes wider area, it's not just Milton Keynes, they draw in. I understand the fact that, yes, there were amateur and non-league clubs in the area when Milton Keynes became a new town, ultimately became a city. And you're in that part of the world at the time around Bletchley and all that. That was actually quite rural in Buckinghamshire at the time. It was very rural. And you didn't really have a big population centre to historically build a rugby union club around, a rugby league club, or an ice hockey team, or whatever, and cricket. Buckinghamshire is one of those counties that doesn't have a great sporting pedigree historically, ironically. And then you put a new town in there. Now, yes, their current stadium was built in preparation for the 2018 and 2022 World Cup bids, because at the time the bidding process opened. Obviously, a big part of it is sporting infrastructure, investing in local sporting infrastructure, and Milton Keynes. Basically, if you want to play a sport at Milton Keynes at a high level before MK Dons, field hockey, the national hockey team's there. Look, Steaua Bucharest. That's crazy. That situation, and has been crazy for 30 years. Because communism used to be fashionable in Eastern Europe. Draws for Rugby Union World Cups might be done closer to competition in the future. Yeah, I think the way World Cup draw is done, not all the teams are fully qualified. I think that could help. It's the way they do it, though. If you finish in the top 3 in your group, you don't have to qualify for the next World Cup. It used to be just if you got to the quarterfinals. Now, because you finish groups are sort of 5 teams per group. If you finish in the top 3, you don't have to qualify for the next World Cup. So the way the whole qualification process works, that could be interesting. The whole qualification process, I think they need looking at, and it's the way they structure the global game. Both codes of rugby have a very interesting international structure. In my opinion, rugby league just doesn't really have one. If we're being honest, the international game I wouldn't say it doesn't exist, but it's not organised in the same way as rugby union, which I think has actually impacted the appeal of the game. They put the clubs first. Rugby union, they put the national teams first. So I think rugby union has won the battle of hearts and minds over rugby league. But rugby league's the better product. That's what I'm saying. Rugby league is the better product at club level. But rugby union has got it right at international level, with the way it markets the game on an international standpoint, with the traditional Six Nations and Rugby Championship competitions for the big 10 nations in World Rugby. You could argue Japan could play in the Rugby Championship, but that's again another debate because they're good enough. in my opinion, to be competitive. So the best 10, 11, 12 teams in the rankings, pretty much the Autumn Internationals, the Summer Tours, they beat the shit out of each other 12 months of the year, basically. Um, but it will be interesting if Wales fail to get out the group, absolutely. But the way the game has evolved since Ireland last had to qualify for a World Cup, which was it the 99 or 2003 World Cup, Ireland had to qualify to get out the group. Well, they didn't make the quarterfinals. Ireland had a shocking World Cup. I believe it was 99. Ireland had to qualify for 2003. I wouldn't say there's always a rugby league fan who's bitter about the success of rugby union. I think rugby union fans have a chip on their shoulder because they don't forgive rugby league for 1895. No, that's thinking. And the split in the game. But both league and union, there's always going to be a handful of fans of both codes who have that chip on their shoulder in regards to the origins of the code split and both. I think both codes try and kill each other. They're fighting against each other rather than working in some kind of friendly cooperation to develop the grassroots skills at between the ages of 7 and 11. Between the ages of 7 and 11, I think both Union and League, because the basics of the game are the same. It's almost non-contact at that point anyway, so you can't really just flatten no one gets hurt playing kids Union or League below the age of 11. It's basically non-contact at that point. So that's the point where you're teaching the handling skills and the positioning and the, the ethics of the sport. Um, so there is that. An increase in teams at the Union Rugby Union World Cup is needed. Well, look at League; they've expanded it. Union's expanded it. There are still some massive mismatches between Tier 1 and Tier 2, and then below. That for me are still far too big. Um, Now look, we've had the same argument about expanding the football tournaments, soccer tournaments for Australians and US and Canadian. Anytime there's talk of an expansion of a domestic league competition or an international competition, oh, you're diluting the talent pool. Oh, it's not. And you're still getting these blowout score lines in league and union, um, which is it really growing the game? But then again, we're getting these blowout score lines in domestic competitions as well in the same league level, where the teams are at the same level, you're still getting blowout scores. And it's a difficult one. Oh, look, talking about a big blowout. One of my work colleagues plays for one of the Reading rugby clubs. They were playing Marlborough. They got beaten 101-3 at the weekend, rugby union. 101-3, and they're meant to be at the same level. 101-3. So it doesn't matter what level you play the game at, you're going to get blowout scores in rugby, more so than football. Which, um, yeah, yes, the Welsh Rugby League side of the World Cup, yes, the majority of them were basically northern lads who might have a link to Flintshire or something. Again, the issues are what I think may actually happen. You may get that cross code international. So you might get the next Jonathan Davis, the Welsh Rebels as they were known in the 80s. Jonathan Davis and some of his colleagues decided, well, we're amateur in union, but they're professional in league, and I want to make some money. And they swapped codes for a while. Why? And that massive in the 80s when that happened when Jonathan Davis ended up playing for Widnes. And there is a danger with the current Welsh situation. Um, would would um, would end up leading to another Welsh Rebels, where some talented outside backs predominantly, I would have thought, end up swapping over to the league. Um, it's been years since the Netherlands last played in England and rugby union. It's been ages since the Dutch play cricket, and they play ice hockey as well. How come in rugby league we used to have a Great Britain team at World Cups? We did for a period, yes, we had for a period. Um, it's an interesting one. It goes back to the Empire days, so it does go back to the foundations of the sport. Um, it's like the same way we have the Lions and Union. We have the GB Lions and Rugby League as well. And it, why we used to. It's how the game was structured back in the day. So in more recent times, we've only had one GB tour team, obviously, in the last 16 years or something. They got battered 3-0 in the tour series. They took down under to Tonga, Fiji. Was it Tonga, Fiji, and Papua New Guinea? Um, in 2019, which was a disaster. No, but there was a funding matrix, and they worked. And for whatever reason, we had Irishmen in the side, we had Welshmen in the side, Scots in the side. We actually did, and Jonathan Davis did actually play in a GB side. Ironically, um, I think there was I think it's to do with the Super League and the formation of the Super League and how the funding structure works. And I think basically the reason why one of the reasons why Jonathan Davis crossed codes along with a couple of other Welsh players was the GB side, the national side, the Great Britain national side, at the time was bloody good. And yes, Great Britain actually has won World Cups. That's something. And there was more chance because the world when he crossed codes, the Rugby Union World Cup wasn't a thing when he did his code hop. And there was a chance he could win the World Cup with Great Britain. Now, what's happened in more recent years is the way that the Rugby Football League has done its funding model is they split the four nations up. Now, Ireland is a unique case with the North and South and some of the politics behind it, how they have a unified rugby union team. They also have a unified rugby league team now. So when it comes to international sport, Ireland is one of the few countries where you can actually have two passports and play for one national side. Weird. It is weird. Not called the GB Lions. In regards to that, it's the way that the RFL have now worked out a funding model, and you don't really have, apart from World Cups, you don't really have Australia and New Zealand touring here and us touring over there anymore. We've lost that in the last 15, 20 years. And it's since we split up the GB side into the home nations, and we've only had one tour in 15, 16 years, and it didn't go very well. And the game is becoming more and more professional. The Netherlands should have a go against England, and we can hark back to the good old days. But no, I think there is so much going on in the game that's like a gimmick neither code needs. Am I surprised? No, because the game back then was amateur, and in order to get the players technically had day jobs, and they would have to get leave off work in order to play internationals. A lot of the England side in the 80s and 90s, until professionalism, were policemen. Ironically, they were. Um, oh, what's his name? One of the ITV presenting team who was acting international was a policeman at the time. He first started playing internationally. But then the game goes professional when he made a choice. He dropped the he dropped the police job. But no, yeah, the players were amateur. Um, at the time until '95, they were technically classed as amateurs. It wasn't a professional game, and especially for some of the smaller nations, in order to get their players free to be able to play, that they would have to give up a huge chunk of time that their employers were a bit concerned about. If the player, let's say, broke his leg or shattered his shoulder, he can't earn anything. So the players themselves were a little bit reluctant. Okay, I'll play at the weekends from your local club side, travel up on the Friday night, play on the Saturday, travel home on the Saturday night, early start, maybe Sunday morning. I'm back at work on the Monday, train in the evenings. They were amateurs, and a lot of my work colleagues now, they train 2 nights a week, play on the Saturday, back in work on Monday. I've got to work with a couple of lads who play at one of the local rugby clubs. Um, so you have to bear that in mind. They're at the amateur level, and there is that. Now, the concern is they get injured playing rugby and then they can't go to work. Then the employers are, well, he's in a position where it's a problem. And employers now are less understanding than they were back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Um, yeah, England in the 70s and 80s didn't have a very good side. No. Well, they had some good players, but Wales and France were smashing them every week, especially, and Scotland had a decent side in the early 80s as well. Wales in the 70s were just untouchable, and France at patches were pretty good as well. Um, Hello, Vice Bicycle Park. What do I think of Jake and what are we talking about? Just Jake Paul or Logan Paul or both? Because they've gaslighted this platform, which has damaged a lot of people's ability to earn and maximise their revenue because of some of the antics they got up to 5, 6 years ago, which have damaged. Well, they gaslit the platform basically because we were told as YouTube creators the reason why the rules changed, which meant I got buggered out of money for since 2018 until recently, was because of Suicide Forest and some of their other antics on the platform. So they gaslit the platform. They gave their crappy public apology. We, as other content creators, were told they can't earn money anymore. They caused the first ad apocalypse, and they continue to make money out of the platform because they're controversial because YouTube gaslit us, which left a very sour taste in the mouth of a lot of people. And they're seen as role models, and they're not role models. Filming a hanging body from a tree, get fucked. Sorry. And some of their antics are just, they're mummy's boys. They're middle class white kids from America who couldn't hack a normal job. Let's be honest. They couldn't hack the real world. That would require some intelligence and some self respect and respecting others. They are utter clowns. Utter clowns. The fact one is now working in professional wrestling and one thinks he's a boxer means they're just a waste of time. And unfortunately, young kids see these guys as role models. It's the same with Andrew Tate. Young men see him as a role model, which is really, really worrying because he's facing human trafficking charges. And a lot of people are commenting on Andrew Tate like they actually know the Romanian prosecutor, police and the prosecuting lawyer can go to a judge for a 30-day extension. And clearly, they have evidence. They're building quite a serious case, and there's people coming like they know the Romanian legal system. I have got 2 Romanian neighbours. I can go upstairs and go, "What's going on?" And they will explain to me in full how their legal system works. it's like it's like an American commenting on our gun laws. We have strict gun laws because we had 2 massacres. How many shootings have you had this week? 7. Is that below average? No, just please. I YouTube looks at it and goes, "Oh, we're making lots of money out of it," because other content creators are commenting on Jake and Logan Paul, and even though they might not be making content anymore, someone else is making content about them, so it's making them a lot of. They would get destroyed. They wouldn't last 5 minutes doing like them. I mean, I can barely last 5 minutes doing my job at the moment with how things are going right and things. I'm having a bit of a tough time. But jokes aside, what did I have? I had an agency worker, so subcontractor, because we're short staffed constantly. So we actually need to get outside subcontractors. And he goes, "Oh yeah, I do weights in the gym, I do gym work like 5 days a week. I've got really good body strength." He lasted 4 days. The guy who replaced him lasted a day on my bin round, and he goes, "I'm an ex youth football player." He got rid. He was playing. He was like Leicester's academy, Reading's academy, I think another academy. So he was playing, under 18 football. He goes, "I've got cardio." Football player. Okay. He lasted a day. We had another one. Goes, "I do a bit of boxing in my spare time. I've got good cardio." He's not there now. None of them are there. So they wouldn't last 5 minutes. They wouldn't last a week, right? And and it's a false representation of what life is. It is. It's a false representation of what life is. And that Prime Energy drink, you actually read what's in it, that will kill you. Kill you. Like one of my work colleagues, she's still an agency worker. She'll get her booked on Monday anyway. She had some. I said, "Read the back of that." Oh, it's got coconut water. Must be really good for you. Yeah, it's 4 doses. The amount of concentrate of coconut water in there will kill you. Drink enough of it. They want you. And look at the people buying this stuff. It tastes like shit. You read what's in it. I'd rather smoke crack. I do drink energy drinks, and I've read what's in them. Then I read what's in that. I'm like, well, this crap's bad for me. This stuff's going to kill me. This stuff will just give me high blood pressure. Well, that stuff will kill you. And the fast that is the boxing, I mean, embarrassing. Embarrassing. I used to love boxing. Now I just find it a joke of a sport. It's trying Monday night wars between WWF at the time, WWE and WCW, with a bit of ECW fight. It's trying to be like gimmicky and there, and it's just well, WWE tried that 20 years ago. They're losing money now. People aren't interested. People, it's just crap. It's crap. It's farcical. It's crap. This is where I think social media has a negative impact. It does. Like, I don't know what it is, but before Suicide Forest, I didn't have a fucking clue who they were. But the more I read into it, the more retarded they sound. They come across as really moronic, a pair of morons, really. I just don't know anymore. But then I look at social media and sport to get back to the real world. I think social media and sport is not a good relationship either. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I look at how the relationship between social media and sport has deteriorated quite rapidly in the last 4 or 5 years. COVID has sped up that deterioration. Um, in the early days, it was actually quite a good younger fans, especially if you're a sports team or a high-profile player in certain sport here or high-profile athlete. It's a good way to interact with young younger fans, with the next generation. And then the so-called adults in the room got hold of the keyboard, and it's not just little Timmy, and it's not just little Timmy and little Jessica who idolise insert Lionel Messi here or insert Johnny Wilkinson there, for example. Some of the superstars of yesteryear, Messi's still playing, but you get what I mean. It's no longer little Timmy and little Jessica or little Samantha and little Sebastian who idolise, your Patrick Vieira's and David Beckham aspire to be the next Jessica Ennis. Jessica Ennis still was responding to my request for a assigned that engagement was good. It's not that anymore. It's a bunch of blokes between the ages, and women between the ages of, I'm going to say, 16 to 45, who may have had some promise at school in PE. They might have been a promising athlete, didn't quite live up to that. Got fat, got lazy, got embittered with the world, and sit with a keyboard and think they know everything about the 4-4-4, the 4-4-2 system and offside. And then they give a lot of torrents of abuse to, well, if it was any other walk of life, they, to athletes who they, to athletes who have had a bad run of form, or they haven't had a good game. And yeah, look, with me, yes, I very much dissect a football match, or I dissect a rugby league match, or an ice hockey match, or a motor racing performance. Like that accident was definitely Verstappen's fault. Hamilton was definitely responsible for that collision. Or I look at the NASCAR and go, look, he did turn into him on the high bank there at Daytona. He did cause that. I can dissect when an individual team or athlete hasn't had a good game or hasn't had a good run of form. And then I look at social media and sport there. And there is constructive criticism, and then there's abuse. And then you've got little Tim who've had a bit of experience playing the game, and I've had friends participate in sport, or just hardcore fans who sit there week in, week out, like me, and watch a lot of sport, so they actually notice things that your average fan doesn't. And then you get the trolls, which is the majority now. And I feel sorry for those athletes and sports teams, and they get the abuse. Like, I feel sorry for sports coaches and players. I do. And I feel sorry for those kids who got that pushy parent. So, yes, little Sebastian, he's quite good at rugby league. He thinks he's the next Cooper Cronk. I'm using an Australian example there, or our little Timmy. He's quite good at rugby union. He will agree Owen Farrell's a bit of a controversial player, but he likes Owen Farrell. He wants to be the next Owen Farrell. He wants to play for England, be captain, top point scorer over the last decade for his country, 100 captains, that kind of thing. Multiple championships at club level. Wants to be the next Owen Farrell. Then you've got Pushy Parent, who's also a keyboard warrior, slagging off Owen Farrell on the fucking social media after a bad England performance. That's your Pushy Parent, who then makes Sebastian and little Timmy go, I don't like the sport anymore. Dad, you being a dick. And Pushy Parent Dad, who's also the keyboard warrior, also abuses the officials who officiate little Timmy or Sebastian's game on the weekend. It's a revolving cycle. Yeah, so there is that. What year can I start making money? Whenever I hit the view hours threshold. It's getting the view hours up. That's it. No, the internet. I mean, I want to hit the internet, but it's still going. Um, so yeah, but no, which explodes, and I get the view hours. Just getting the view hours up, getting as many people as possible to watch the content, and go from there. I'm just surprised some of my videos. That's what really surprises me. I'm absolutely stunned that content I made. Stand it. And I don't know how. I've given up trying to figure out how the algorithm. So there's that. But yeah, when I start making money, it's on. There is no like definite date. I could start making money. It may be later in the year. I just don't know. Couldn't tell you. Um, content. Um, it could be any time, really. Any time. Um, It's that threshold. The shorts feed, I don't make enough shorts um, to get enough views off that, unless I did some real cut and paste editing with some of my existing videos. That just isn't going to happen unless I get a snowstorm like tomorrow and I film it, which looks likely next week. I could actually film the snow coming down, and go snow at work. Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. Um, um, and enough people watch that. It's just yeah, it's all on the Jake and Logan Paul. I think I've said enough on that. I think there's a right stake. I'm just a guy in his mid-30s talking about sport every bloody day. I'm not saying I'm an expert. I'm learning things about sport all the time, but the term influencer shows. A lot of them haven't really done a hard day's graft ever, and it shows how out of touch with the real world they are. I should do a video about why I hate the term influencer. Um, because it's been proven that some of these influencers and their lifestyle trends are actually very ridiculous. Ridiculous. I was going to go into my Jeff Tuvey rant then. There needs to be investigation. It's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. I'm not going to do my Jeff Tuvey because I've got too many teeth. But and if you don't know the Jeff Tuvey rant, it was when he was the Manning Sea Eagles head coach, and he went, "That's ridiculous for this. There needs to be an investigation." He was pissed off at the end of the game, the post-match press conference. He had a fantastic blow-up. It was hilarious. It is internet worthy. No, look, jokes aside, yeah, there are some things to do with social media influencer. I don't like that term. It's disingenuous and haven't lived in the real world. They made a couple of silly videos when they were like teenagers, early 20s, and made some money off them. They made a couple of silly videos when they were like teenagers, early 20s, and made some money off them. They don't live in the real world. They all think they're the Kardashians, where you just don't actually do anything for a living and make money. And they think that's how the world works. And it doesn't. And it sucks. It sucks being working poor. And yeah, it's very obvious. I mean, some of them have made it big on YouTube and all that, and no, I'm not working with you. I basically told them to stuff it. And I think that's fair. I think because I see how mainstream media works, I don't trust it because they'll misconstrue what I say, and I don't trust them. And I've told them to do one. By trying to think, the Guardian, I believe it's the Guardian, talked to me in regards to some of my footage in regards to use their relegation from the Football League and their struggles in the non-league this season. In response, didn't even give them a response because I would want to be paid. So you're paying me. You're paying me to use my content. Simple. And I'm highly critical of mainstream media journals. I don't trust them. They have an agenda. They will twist words. They will misrepresent stuff. And sense that I know some other whereby they do it as a hobby, and when they grow, they get the sponsorships in there, and then my opinion. So there's that. Right, my internet has decided to finally stop cooperating, which is just aggravating me now because I'm right by the fucking mast, and it's becoming harder